Hello, welcome to Lobby Stories. Chapter 1. The Last Stage of Cancer. My name is Mark. I've lived a long life, almost 40 years of marriage to a woman named Alina. As I lie here in this sterile hospital room, waiting for the inevitable end, I find myself reflecting not on the cancer eating away at my body, but on the emptiness that has shadowed my heart for decades. Alina was the love of my life, though I often wondered if I was hers. From the moment I first saw her in high school, I was captivated. She was the queen of the school, the girl everyone admired, while I was just the quiet, bookish boy sitting at the back of the class. But despite our differences, I dared to hope. I loved her with everything I had, and when we finally married, I thought my life was complete. But love, as I learned, is not always returned. Alina was distant, a fortress of ice around a heart that had long since stopped beating for anything but her work. She had become this way after losing her parents at a young age, hardened by the responsibility of protecting their legacy from greedy relatives. She poured all her energy into her career, the one thing that never let her down. I understood her pain, her need to keep moving forward, to bury her grief in work. But it didn't stop the ache inside me, the longing for a tenderness she never offered. I gave her everything, my heart, my support, my years, but in return, all I received was cold indifference. Our children grew up knowing me as the devoted father, the grandfather who always had time for them. Yet there was always something missing, a void I could never fill. Now, as I lie here, the cancer gnawing at what little life I have left, I find myself thinking of her. Alina is away on a business trip, securing another deal, completely unaware that her husband is dying. I didn't tell her about my diagnosis when I found out a few weeks ago. Why would I? She wouldn't have cared. Her work has always been her first love. In these final moments, surrounded by our children and grandchildren, I should feel a sense of peace. I am proud of the life I've built, the family I've raised. But the sorrow of never truly being loved by the woman I adored still lingers. It's a regret that cuts deeper than the cancer ever could. As I close my eyes for the last time, a strange sense of relief washes over me. I'm grateful that I got to say goodbye to those who matter most. But as for Alina, she will return to find me gone, just as she was always absent from my heart. Chapter 2. Reborn. The moment my eyes fluttered open, I was greeted not by the sterile white walls of a hospital room, but by the familiar sight of a college classroom. My heart pounded in my chest as I took in the scene before me, the chalkboard, the rows of desks, the sunlight streaming through the windows. It felt surreal, like a dream I was sure I'd wake from at any moment. But as I glanced around, taking in the faces of my classmates and the stern expression of the professor at the front of the room, a strange realization settled over me. I was back. Somehow, against all logic and reason, I had been given a second chance at life. A wave of disbelief washed over me, quickly followed by a rush of excitement. My heart raced as I replayed the last moments of my previous life in my mind. The cancer, the loneliness, the unfulfilled love. All of it was gone. Now, here I was, young again, with the power to rewrite my fate. The first thought that crossed my mind was Alina. But as soon as her name entered my thoughts, I forced it out. No, this time would be different. This time, I would steer clear of her. My life had been a tapestry of love unreturned, of a marriage filled with cold indifference. I had spent years pining for her, sacrificing everything for her affection, only to be met with a heart as cold as ice. I wouldn't let history repeat itself. Determined to live differently, I made a silent vow to myself. Stay away from Alina and embrace the youth I had once let slip through my fingers. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, and without a second thought, I bolted from the room. My legs carried me out of the building and onto the vast expanse of the college grounds. The sky was a brilliant blue, the air filled with the sounds of laughter and chatter. I ran until my lungs burned and my clothes clung to my skin with sweat, a wild exhilaration coursing through my veins. This was freedom, the freedom to make new choices, to live life on my terms. The next day, I did something I never would have dared to do in my previous life. I signed up for physical education classes and sports. The announcement caused quite a stir among my classmates. The once shy and bookish nerd, was now diving headfirst into activities I had always avoided. But I didn't care about their shock or their whispers. For the first time in my life, I felt alive, truly alive, and the joy I felt was written all over my face. When I entered the classroom that day, I made sure to secure a seat by the window. I had never paid much attention to such things before. My mind had always been fixated on two things, my studies and Alina. But this time, I wanted to savor every moment, every experience that youth had to offer. As I sat down, lost in my thoughts, the door opened, and she walked in, Alina. My heart skipped a beat, but I quickly suppressed the feeling. I was different now. I had no intention of getting involved with her again. Yet, to my surprise, she walked over and sat down next to me. For a moment, she simply stared at me, her gaze lingering as if searching for something. Then, without a word, she turned her attention to the front of the room. I could feel the eyes of the entire class on us, their surprise palpable. But I ignored them, and I ignored her. Days passed, and Alina began to initiate small conversations with me, questions about classwork, casual remarks about the weather. I kept my responses brief, never encouraging her to continue. I didn't want to get caught up in the same regrets that had plagued my past life. But then, something unexpected happened. One day, my pocket money ran out earlier than usual, and I found myself without enough to buy lunch. I sat in the cafeteria, drinking only water, while the others were around me. It was then that Alina noticed. Her eyes narrowed as she watched me, and before I could react, she grabbed my hand and led me out of the cafeteria to a quiet spot under a tree. To my astonishment, she pulled out her lunch and handed me half of it. This was not the Alina I remembered. The Alina from my past life had never cared whether I ate or not, had never once shown concern for my well-being. And yet, here she was, offering me her food with a soft expression I had never seen before. I hesitated, my mind racing. Should I accept? Should I push her away as I had planned? But when I looked down at the food, I froze. Among the dishes was my favorite, potatoes cooked just the way I liked them. I was taken aback. Alina had always hated potatoes. How did she know they were my favorite? When had she started eating them herself? Before I could voice my confusion, she spoke, her voice gentle, almost tender. When are you going to eat? I made it myself. I know it's your favorite. Her words left me speechless. The Alina I knew had never prepared a meal for me, had never even taken the time to learn what I liked. And now, here she was, asking me to eat with her, her eyes filled with a concern that I had never seen before. But I couldn't let myself get drawn in. I had vowed to live differently this time, to avoid the pain of unrequited love. So, I forced a smile and pushed the lunch back towards her. You don't have to do this. I can make my own lunch. I don't want to cause you any trouble. Her eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something hurt, perhaps, before she quickly masked it. I turned and walked away, back to class, determined not to look back. But as I left, I could feel her cold gaze drilling into my back, and a shiver ran down my spine. What was happening? Has Alina really changed? Or was this some sort of game? My resolve wavered for a moment, but I shook off the doubt. I had made my choice, and I would stick to it, no matter how much her unexpected kindness tugged at my heart. Chapter 3, Couple Program. The college campus was buzzing with excitement as students prepared for the annual event known as the Couple Program. It was a lively competition where pairs would participate in various activities, testing not only their physical abilities, but also their coordination and teamwork. The event featured everything from running and dancing to singing and solving puzzles together. For many, it was a chance to showcase their chemistry with a partner, to build friendships, and for some, even to spark romances. For me, the Couple Program represented something else entirely, a new chapter in my life. I had spent months focusing on building my physical strength and confidence through rigorous participation in sports and physical activities. Gone was the shy, awkward nerd I had once been. In his place stood a young man who, while not overly muscular, had developed lean muscle and a newfound sense of self-assurance. It was time to step out of the shadows and embrace the world around me, to form connections and make new friends. As the event drew closer, I found myself deep in thought, pondering who I should choose as my partner. There were plenty of options, each with their own appeal. But before I could make a decision, something unexpected happened. Alina approached me. "Will you be my partner?" Her voice, usually cold and distant, had a hint of something softer in it, something almost vulnerable. I looked up at her, surprised. The Alina I knew was the queen of the campus, admired by everyone but distant from all. She had always been out of reach, her heart encased in ice, yet here she was, asking me to pair up with her for this event. For a moment, I hesitated, the memories of my past life flooding back, the years of unrequited love, the longing, the pain of never receiving even a fraction of the affection I had given her. But I had made a vow. This time things would be different. I wasn't going to fall into the same trap. "I don't want to," I replied coldly, standing up and meeting her gaze with an unwavering stare. Her brow furrowed in confusion, and she asked, "Why?" Her voice carried a mix of surprise and hurt, but I didn't offer her any explanation. I simply turned and walked away, leaving her standing there with unanswered questions in her eyes. Determined to keep my distance, I sought out Clara, a beautiful and popular girl who is known for her friendly and outgoing nature. I approached her with confidence and asked her to be my partner for the event. Clara, with a bright smile, agreed without hesitation, and we quickly became the talk of the campus. The day of the couple program arrived, and the air was filled with excitement. Clara and I stood together at the starting line, ready to take on the challenges ahead. But as I glanced at the crowd, I noticed Alina standing among them, her eyes fixed on me. There was something different in her gaze, an intensity, a fiery red hue that spoke of anger, jealousy, and perhaps something more. She watched every move I made, her eyes narrowing whenever I shared a laugh with Clara or leaned in close to discuss our strategy. As the competition began, I threw myself into it with enthusiasm, determined to enjoy the experience. Clara and I worked well together, our chemistry evident as we navigated the various challenges. We ran side by side, our feet pounding against the track in perfect sync. We danced with a rhythm that drew cheers from the crowd. We sang with voices that harmonized beautifully. The applause and praise from our peers felt like a warm embrace, a validation of the new life I was building for myself. But even as I celebrated, a strange emptiness gnawed at the edges of my heart. I couldn't ignore the fact that, despite everything, a part of me was still drawn to Alina. 40 years of one-sided love didn't simply vanish overnight, and I could feel the remnants of that love tugging at my resolve. Yet, I pushed those feelings aside, focusing instead on the present moment, on Clara, and the joy of the competition. Throughout the event, I caught glimpses of Alina in the crowd, her red eyes following me, filled with something I couldn't quite decipher. Was it hope? Anguish? Regret? Each time our eyes met, a pang of pain shot through me, but I quickly looked away, refusing to let myself be drawn back into the past. The day ended with Clara and me being praised for our excellent performance, but even as we celebrated our success, I couldn't shake the image of Alina's gaze from my mind. The following day, Alina came to college, and over the next week, she began sitting next to me in class. Her presence was a constant reminder of the past I was trying so hard to leave behind, yet I couldn't bring myself to tell her to leave. She started following me around campus, initiating small conversations, and even brought me lunch, her smile soft and almost tender whenever our eyes met. It was as if she was trying to bridge a gap that had always existed between us, trying to create a bond that had never been there before. 7 months passed in this strange, new dynamic. Alina was always there, waiting for me at my home gate each morning, walking with me to college, her steps matching mine in a silent companionship. I couldn't deny that a part of me had grown used to her presence, even if my mind remained foggy with the memories of my past life. Then, one day, Clara approached me during class. She stood by my desk, her eyes serious as she said, "Can we talk? Let's meet on the rooftop after class." Alina, who had been sitting next to me, froze. Her gaze shifted from Clara to me, her expression hardening into something cold and unyielding. For a moment, there was a flicker of panic in her eyes, a fear that I couldn't quite understand. "Sure," I replied, trying to keep my voice casual, but I couldn't ignore the way Alina's stare bore into me, as if silently pleading with me not to go. As Clara walked away, I felt a tension settle over the room, a tension that seemed to emanate from Alina herself. What was she so afraid of? And why did the idea of meeting with Clara seem to unsettle her so much? The question swirled in my mind as I prepared to head to the rooftop, where I knew Clara would be waiting. But even as I made my way there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to change, that the delicate balance I had been maintaining for the past 7 months was on the verge of collapsing. Chapter 4. Confession. The rooftop of the college was always a place of quiet solitude, away from the noise and chaos of the classrooms below. As I stood there, the cold breeze brushed against my face, clearing my mind and grounding me in the moment. The sky was a soft shade of blue, the kind that made you feel like anything was possible, yet there was a tension in the air, a weight of unspoken words and emotions. Moments later, Clara arrived, her steps light yet purposeful. I noticed something else as she approached Alina. She was trailing behind Clara, her usual confident stride replaced by something hesitant, almost cautious. She crouched down near the gate, peeking at us from behind a corner, her eyes locked on the scene unfolding before her. Clara stood before me, her face a mix of determination and nervousness. "What is it that you want to say?" I asked, my voice steady despite the swirling thoughts in my head. She took a deep breath, her cheeks flushing slightly as she cleared her throat. "Mark," she began, her voice soft yet clear, "I've been wanting to tell you this for a while now. I love you." Her confession hung in the air between us, a simple yet powerful declaration that seemed to echo in the stillness of the rooftop. I could feel the weight of her words, the sincerity behind them. But as I looked into her eyes, something else stirred within me, an unshakable realization. From the corner of my eye, I saw Alina. She had heard everything. Her posture, usually so composed, seemed to crumble as she silently rose from her hiding spot and retreated back to the classroom. It was as if Clara's words had shattered something within her, and for a brief moment, I saw a vulnerability in Alina that I had never seen before. Turning back to Clara, I bowed slightly, an expression of respect and regret. "I'm sorry, Clara," I said softly. "I appreciate your feelings, but my heart belongs to someone else. I've loved another girl for years, and that love is something I can't change." Clara's face fell, a mixture of disappointment and understanding crossing her features. She nodded slowly, accepting my words with a grace that only deepened my respect for her. "I see," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for being honest." With that, I turned and walked away, my heart heavy but my mind resolute. As I descended the stairs and left the rooftop behind, one thought consumed me: Alina. Clara's confession had opened my eyes to the depth of my feelings for her. Despite everything, despite the pain and the past, my love for Alina was unbreakable. It was a love that had endured through years, through a lifetime, and now, nothing could separate me from her. Determined, I set out to find Alina. I searched every corner of the college, classrooms, hallways, the library, but she was nowhere to be found. I called her phone repeatedly, each unanswered ring fueling the growing worry in my chest. Alina had always been strong, unyielding, but there was a fragility to her that I knew all too well. The fear of losing her again, of repeating the mistakes of the past, drove me to desperation. The sun began to set, and still, there was no sign of her. Night fell, and with it, a deepening sense of dread. Where could she have gone? The memory of her retreating figure on the rooftop replayed in my mind, her eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. It was then that I remembered. In my previous life, there had been a time when Alina had faced high stress, leading to severe illness. She had lived alone with her grandmother in a secluded villa, far from the prying eyes of the world. Without a second thought, I rushed to the villa. The journey was long, the night cold, but nothing could deter me. I knew I had to find her, to be there for her in a way I hadn't been before. When I arrived, the sight that greeted me was one of heartbreak. Alina lay in bed, her body curled up under a thick blanket. Her eyes were swollen, the delicate skin around them red and puffy from tears. Her cheeks were flushed with fever, a stark contrast to the usual coolness of her demeanor. She looked so small, so vulnerable, and it broke my heart to see her like this. I approached her quietly, kneeling by the bedside and gently brushing a stray lock of hair from her forehead. Her skin was burning to the touch, the fever consuming her strength. I knew what had happened. Just as in my previous life, the stress and emotional turmoil had taken their toll, leading to this state of exhaustion and illness. For 3 days and nights, I stayed by her side. I refused to leave, even for a moment, determined to nurse her back to health. I cared for her the way I had always wanted to, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, coaxing her to drink water, holding her hand as she tossed and turned in restless sleep. The villa, usually so quiet and lonely, was filled with the sounds of my whispered reassurances, my pleas for her to get better. On the 4th day, as dawn broke and the first rays of sunlight filtered through the curtains, Alina stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, they were unfocused, still lost in the haze of fever. But then they found mine, and in that gaze, I saw something I had never seen before: relief, gratitude, and a deep, unspoken emotion that mirrored my own. "Mark," she whispered, her voice hoarse from days of illness. "Why are you here?" I smiled softly, my heart swelling with a love that I knew was eternal. "Because," I replied, "there's nowhere else I'd rather be." Chapter 5. Guilt. Alina's eyes fluttered open, and as her vision cleared, she saw Mark sitting by her side. The sight of him, the man she had been avoiding all day, caused her heart to constrict with a mix of relief and pain. She blinked a few times, trying to make sense of his presence. Then, her eyes welled up with tears that she could no longer hold back. The dam broke, and she began to cry, her sobs racking her body as she turned her face away from him. "Why are you here?" she managed to choke out between sobs. The bitterness in her voice cut through the air like a knife. "Go to the girl you love. Kiss her. Marry her. Do whatever you want. Why are you with me?" Mark felt a pang in his chest, not from her harsh words, but from the overwhelming love and guilt that washed over him. He could see the torment in her eyes, the way her hands trembled as she spoke. She was trying to push him away, but her vulnerability only drew him closer. Without a word, Mark leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a declaration, a release of all the emotions he had kept bottled up for so long. His lips moved against hers with a fervor that left them both breathless. As he pulled back, he whispered softly in her ear, "Alina, I love you." Alina froze, her breath hitching. She looked up at him, her tear-streaked face full of confusion and a hint of hope. Do you love me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mark smiled, a bittersweet smile that spoke of decades of unspoken words. "After 40 years of marriage, Alina, you've finally learned how to express love. You don't know how long I've waited for this moment." Her expression shifted from confusion to realization, and then to a deep blush that spread across her cheeks. She looked away, trying to hide her embarrassment. When did you find out?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark chuckled softly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "The day you brought me lunch filled with my favorite dishes," he said. "You even made potatoes, Alina. You hate potatoes." That's when I knew. Alina's eyes widened in surprise, and then they softened as she remembered that day. She had cooked for him, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to show him, in the only way she knew how, that she cared. Her chest tightened with a mix of emotions she had never been able to articulate. All those years of keeping her feelings locked away, of never letting him see the depth of her love, now seemed like wasted time. She suddenly reached out and hugged him tightly, burying her face in his chest as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Why did you leave me alone there?" she sobbed, her voice muffled against him. "Why didn't you tell me about the cancer? Why? Mark held her close, his heart breaking at her anguish. He stroked her hair, trying to soothe her, but he knew there was nothing he could say to make up for the pain he had caused. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I thought you didn't care. I didn't want to burden you." Alina shook her head violently, her tears soaking his shirt. "I cared, Mark. I always cared. I didn't know how to show it. I was so scared of losing you, and now I've lost you anyway." Mark's own eyes filled with tears as he held her tighter. "You haven't lost me," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm here now, Alina. I'm not going anywhere." They stayed like that for what felt like hours, clinging to each other as if the world outside no longer existed. Alina's sobs eventually quieted, but she didn't let go. She couldn't bear to let him go. Not again. After a long silence, Alina began to speak, her voice soft and filled with regret. "After you died," she said, "I didn't know how to go on. Everything reminded me of you. The house, the company, even the smallest things like the way you used to leave your coffee cup on the table. I missed you so much, and I hated myself for not telling you how much I loved you when I had the chance." Mark listened, his heart aching with every word. He had never known the depth of her pain, the guilt she had carried since his death. "Alina, I never doubted your love," he said gently. I needed to hear it. I needed to feel it." "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know that now. And I'm so sorry, Mark. I'm sorry for everything." Mark kissed the top of her head, feeling the warmth of her body against his. "It's not too late," he said softly. "We still have time. Let's not waste it." Alina nodded, her tears finally slowing as she rested her head against his chest. "I don't want to waste any more time," she murmured. "I want to spend the rest of my life making it up to you, loving you the way I should have from the start." Mark smiled, his heart swelling with love for the woman in his arms. "That's all I ever wanted," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Just you, Alina. Just you." And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alina felt a sense of peace. She knew they couldn't change the past, but they could make the most of the time they had left. And she vowed, right then and there, that she would never let him go again. Chapter 6. Alina's Story. Alina's life had always been a fortress built on strength and resilience. From a young age, she had learned that to survive in the world, one had to be unyielding, unbreakable. Love, to her, had been an alien concept, something reserved for the realm of fantasy rather than her reality. Her childhood was marked by an absence of affection. Her parents, engrossed in their own struggles and ambitions, had never given her the love she craved. Instead, she was expected to uphold the legacy of her father's business empire, a responsibility that left little room for emotional warmth. As Alina grew up, she adopted a belief that love could be measured by material security. To her, love was synonymous with providing comfort and ensuring that those around her lacked for nothing. This misguided notion was reinforced by the cold, transactional relationships she observed throughout her life. Whenever Mark, her husband, showed her affection or expressed his love, she felt an acute sense of embarrassment. She was unequipped to respond to his warmth, her upbringing having left her emotionally stunted. Over the years, Alina's emotional armor became a mask of coldness. She believed that her strength was synonymous with her ability to remain detached. Even as she grew older, the mask never came off. The years rolled by, and though her outward life seemed stable and successful, an emptiness gnawed at her heart. She loved Mark deeply, but her inability to show it was a source of constant inner conflict. Her heart ached with the knowledge that despite her love, she could never fully open up to him. Mark, ever patient and loving, never complained about Alina's demeanor. His love was unwavering, even when it was met with her coldness. He remained a constant in her life, a source of stability and comfort. Despite her efforts to maintain her facade, every time she saw Mark, she felt a fleeting sense of relief. His presence was a balm to her troubled soul, a reminder of the loyalty and love she had always had but never truly understood. As the years passed, Alina's feelings of regret accumulated like layers of dust. She wanted to be more than just a strong woman who had been too proud to show her love. She longed to live her remaining years with Mark, to finally let her guard down and experience the companionship she had denied herself. But fate, in its cruel irony, had other plans. The day Alina decided to confront her feelings and express her love, she returned home to find that Mark had succumbed to cancer. The shock of his death shattered her. The years of suppressed emotions, the regret and guilt she had held at bay, came crashing down in a devastating flood. The realization that she had lost her chance to make things right with him was too much to bear. The walls she had built around herself crumbled, leaving her exposed and broken. Alina collapsed from the weight of her grief. The world she had carefully constructed around her strength and self-reliance fell apart like a house of cards. In the days following Mark's death, she was tormented by fever and haunted by illusions of a younger Mark, vibrant and full of life, smiling at her as he had on their first night together when he promised never to leave her side. These visions were a bitter reminder of the love she had never fully acknowledged, a love that had been there all along but remained buried under her emotional coldness. As she lay in bed, her heart ached with the knowledge of how poorly she had treated Mark throughout their marriage. Despite her best intentions, she had never shown him the love he deserved. He had never complained, never asked for more, but she had always known deep down that she had failed him. She wept for hours, her tears a release of all the pain and regret she had kept hidden. Eventually, Alina's life came to an end. In her final days, she was alone. Her children and grandchildren, who had cut ties with her after Mark's death, stayed away, holding her responsible for the suffering she had caused. She passed away with her heart heavy, filled with regret for the life she had lived and the relationships she had destroyed. But death was not the end for Alina. In a twist of fate, she found herself back in her college days, the time when she first met Mark. At first, she was disoriented, unable to comprehend why she had been given this chance to relive her past. But as the days passed, she began to see it as a divine opportunity to make amends. She was determined to correct her mistakes, to show Mark the love she had failed to express in her previous life. However, the reality of her second chance was far from what she had hoped for. Mark, in this new life, was distant and indifferent. His eyes, once warm and filled with affection, now held a guarded expression. Alina's heart sank as she realized that the Mark she had known was no longer the same person. Her attempts to connect with him seemed futile, and her feelings of regret only deepened. Alina spent her days sitting next to Mark, silently observing him with a heavy heart. She wanted to speak to him, to apologize for the mistake she had made, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. Instead, she could only watch as he went about his life, his presence a painful reminder of what could have been. One day, Alina saw Mark drinking water to stave off hunger. The sight stirred something within her, a fierce determination to show him her love. She rushed home and prepared his favorite dishes, including potatoes, a gesture that carried the weight of her unspoken affection. She hoped that by caring for him in this small way, she could begin to mend the rift between them. When the college announced the couple program, Alina seized the opportunity. She asked Mark to be her partner, hoping that the event would allow them to reconnect. But when he rejected her, her heart shattered. Watching him with another girl, Clara, during the event was a blow she could barely withstand. The sight of them together, seemingly happy and in love, was a cruel reminder of how much had changed. In the weeks that followed, Alina decided to pursue a different approach. She believed that friendship could be the key to rekindling their connection. She began to follow Mark, making his meals and trying to win his favor. But even as she tried to be a supportive friend, Her heart was heavy with unfulfilled longing. Clara's confession of love to Mark was the final blow. Alina could no longer bear the weight of her unspoken feelings. She returned home, overcome with despair, and collapsed on her bed. Her health deteriorated, and she could barely perceive the world around her. In her final moments, she sensed someone caring for her, but her condition prevented her from seeing or hearing clearly. When she finally regained consciousness, she saw Mark sitting beside her, a gentle smile on his face. It was a moment of profound clarity for her. With tears streaming down her cheeks, she poured out all her emotions, asking for his forgiveness and revealing the depth of her regret. In the present day, Mark and Alina stood facing each other, their eyes locked in a silent exchange of understanding. The pain of their past had been laid bare, and now they faced the future with a renewed sense of connection. Alina, once a woman of cold demeanor, had transformed into a loving and caring individual. The years of regret and guilt had given way to a deeper, more profound love. As they announced their renewed relationship, it was clear that both had changed. Alina's transformation from a distant and emotionally unavailable woman to one who embraced love fully was a testament to the power of redemption and forgiveness. Mark's love for her had grown even deeper, forged in the crucible of their shared past and present. Their wedding was a celebration of this transformation, a union that symbolized not just their love for each other, but also their personal growth. The cold, unfeeling Alina of the past had been replaced by a beautiful, affectionate woman who loved Mark with all her heart. Their story was a testament to the fact that it's never too late to change, to love deeply, and to seek redemption.